In a peaceful residential area, the imposing houses, bathed in the afternoon sun, were surrounded by meticulously tended gardens. The perfectly trimmed hedges, cobbled paths and lush green lawns seemed to be a mirror of an orderly, trouble-free life. The birds were singing, the children were playing silently on the sidewalks, and everything seemed to be happening in perfect harmony. But in the shadows of this idyllic landscape, there were invisible tensions, prejudices hidden under polite smiles, and furtive glances that betrayed the neighbors' distrust. Marguerite had lived on this street for more than 20 years, and in this seemingly smooth world, she felt at ease, in control. She had always valued stability and order. But this tranquility which enveloped him, this facade of respectability, was woven with threads of ancient prejudices, inherited from an era when diversity was seen as a threat. Every day, as she dragged her steps along this orderly street, Marguerite took refuge in her certainties, in her well-anchored ideas. His eyes, hard and piercing, scrutinized everything that deviated from the established order. She had grown up in a family where racial distinctions were not simply a question of skin color, but a way of thinking, of defining oneself. People like them aren't meant to live here, she repeated to herself. These, them, were the people who didn't look like the ones she was used to seeing in this neighborhood. In his mind, a clear separation existed between those who were entitled to respectability and those who, by his standards, were not worthy of it. This reasoning had been woven throughout his life, until it became a second skin, an almost thoughtless thought. David, her neighbor, embodied everything she had learned to fear. Although he was in no way threatening, his presence disturbed her deeply. David was not like the other neighbors. He was calm, composed, always smiling, but with a discretion that disturbed her. He had an impeccable appearance, a presence that did not belong, according to her world. Every time she passed him, whether mowing his lawn or chatting politely with another neighbor, an uneasiness grew within her. This calm, this dignity, was almost too perfect, too integrated. She didn't understand how someone like him, a black man, could live such a life, escape the intruder label she had assigned to him. She constantly wondered if he wasn't playing a role, hiding a truth that she couldn't figure out. One particularly boring afternoon, while peering through her curtains at David's garden, she saw him coming out of his house with a large black leather bag. The man's figure seemed more imposing in the afternoon sun. He walked towards his SUV with calculated slowness, as if he were planning something mysterious. For Marguerite, there was no logic in her behavior. Why did a man like him behave like this, so deliberate? She wondered if he was planning something dangerous. Perhaps a burglary, or worse, illegal trafficking, she thought. She had no proof, no solid basis, but worry grew inside her like a shockwave. She picked up her phone, hesitantly at first, then with a certainty that petrified her. I have to do something before he does something stupid. His finger trembled for a moment on the keyboard. We had to act quickly. Suddenly, she pressed the 911 numbers. The operator's voice, neutral and professional, rang through the receiver. Police, how can I help you? I see a strange man in the neighborhood. He comes out of a nearby house with a large bag, and it seems to me like he's planning something suspicious, she lied, her heart beating faster the more she spoke. He looked at me in a strange way. I swear, he's acting really strange. We have to stop him before he does something stupid. The operator took his information and, although his call was neither clear nor precise, she sent a police car to the neighborhood. Marguerite hung up, satisfied, her mind filled with certainties and justifications. She was convinced she had done the right thing. The evil was identifiable, and it was this strange neighbor, this man who did not fit his worldview. She felt comforted by her decision. A few minutes later, police sirens were heard. 2 police officers, a man and a woman, arrived in a patrol car, their headlights breaking the calm of the afternoon. Their uniforms, of perfectly fitted austerity, seemed to announce the end of tranquility. Marguerite observed, completely satisfied, the arrival of the police. But his gaze became more incisive when David, coming out of his garden, saw the police approaching him. His instinct for calm and control kicked in instantly. He knew something was wrong. The police, without explanation or ceremony, began to ask him questions, their tone brusque and without nuance. "Sir, you are under arrest for suspicion of criminal activity. Put your hands on the hood of the car and don't move," the male police officer ordered, in a firm tone. David, although besieged by a flood of unwarranted questions, remained calm. He immediately understood that what he was experiencing was not simply a procedure, but an incarnate prejudice, a racist judgment that he had to confront without giving in to panic. He then turned to the police and replied in a calm voice, "I'm not doing anything wrong, and you know that as well as I do. I have nothing to reproach myself for." However, deep inside him, a thought began to creep in, sharpened by the reality of what was happening. "It's because of Marguerite. She's the one who called, without knowing who I am." David remained calm, despite the careful search of his vehicle and his leather bag, a gesture which, according to the logic of the police, was aimed at finding evidence of any wrongdoing. Their hands searched roughly, as if the lack of evidence was an anomaly, a mistake that needed to be corrected. David knew that this tense moment could get out of control if the situation was handled poorly, but he was not the type to give in to panic. When the police found nothing incriminating, the male police officer, visibly upset at not having discovered any clues, turned on his heel, his face marked with irritation at the failure. He went to his radio, probably calling a superior to report what he perceived to be a false lead. David, in impassive calm, took a deep breath and took out his phone. He knew it was time to assert his authority and his true identity. He quickly dialed the number of his colleague at the FBI, aware that his reputation, but also his safety, was at stake. A few minutes later, the rumble of a new car was heard. This time, the sound of a different, more distinctive engine announced the arrival of a black car and tinted windows. An officer in a dark suit came out, and his imperious look immediately made the police understand that they were far from knowing David's identity. The agent, with an impassive face, walked firmly towards the police. He exuded a quiet authority, and the two police officers who had been so quick to arrest David froze in an instant, the license plate of the FBI agent's car giving them an immediate glimpse of the disaster that had just occurred. The agent stopped abruptly in front of them, and his icy gaze pierced them. "You are arresting an undercover federal agent. Back off immediately," he ordered in a voice that left no room for hesitation. The police officers, caught in their own haste, backed away instantly, but their faces betrayed embarrassment and incomprehension. Marguerite, who had observed the scene from her window, felt her heart speed up. She had the impression that the situation was taking a more complicated turn than she had imagined. Although she felt both gratified that David was perhaps caught in the act, she had no idea of the true dimensions of what she had unleashed. The idea that she had been right at that precise moment comforted her, but confusion overcame her. She rushed out of her house, hoping for an explanation, some kind of vindication of this disturbing and perhaps revealing scene. David, however, looked at her with an expression more severe than concerned. He knew that a moment of direct confrontation was inevitable. "Marguerite, you don't know how wrong you were," he said in a calm but impactful tone, his gaze deeply fixed on hers. "You accused me for no reason, and now will have to live with the consequences." He knew he had to go beyond this simple confrontation. There was no way he was going to let this attack pass without raising the larger question of how she had manipulated events to lead him into a spiral of unwarranted suspicion. The next day, a meeting took place at the local police, a moment which marked the beginning of the real confrontation for Marguerite. She was invited to explain her actions in front of an assembly where David, in the role of the FBI agent, not only had the authority to obtain an answer to her questions, but also the support of a team ready to face any attempted abuse of power. The report she had made was now analyzed from a very different angle from that of the banal accusation, an abuse of power the extent of which she had not measured. As Marguerite faced the reality of her actions, a strange irony struck her. Not only had she wrongly accused her neighbor, but she also found herself having to answer to the man she had seen as a simple target of her prejudices. A federal agent, the one she thought she had been watching with suspicion, was the one who would now confront her with the seriousness of her actions. The local police forcefully reminded her that abuse of power was a serious offense, and that it would be necessary to investigate the unfounded report she had made, causing a shockwave that left Marguerite under the weight of her own mistake. David, however, was not driven by a desire for revenge or a punitive desire. He understood that a more subtle form of justice was necessary. It was a lesson that Marguerite had to learn, but without it turning into an act of revenge. He turned to her, absolute calm in his eyes, and spoke his words to her in a manner that was both firm and full of wisdom. Marguerite, I hope this experience will serve as a lesson to you. Racism leads nowhere. You judged me based on my color, and you accused me without proof. But I hope you can learn to look at people for who they really are, and not for the false ideas you have in your head. Marguerite's eyes lowered, and it was as if a veil was slowly lifting. In this moment of heavy silence, she finally understood the scope of her prejudices. She had always believed that her beliefs were justified, but reality now stood before her in undeniable form. However, David knew that this realization would only be the beginning of a long road. Redemption would not come instantly, but the next step would be crucial. It was up to him to change his outlook, to deconstruct a past anchored in stereotypes, and to face his own inner demons.